Jeff Tunn is honest and direct when he says nobody grows up wanting to be a CIO. If you ask Jeff, he'll say he wanted to be a rock star, touring the backroads of the country in a van, playing gigs on weeknights. That was always the plan, until an impulse purchase of a Commodore 64 changed Jeff's path forever. Jeff is now a multi-time CIO, currently serving as an IT strategy advisor at Intervision and the founder of Tunn Enterprises, and he joined IT Visionaries to take us through his journey. On this episode, Jeff provides insights into the role of the CIO, and he divulges some of the key questions current CIOs are trying to find answers to, including those surrounding diversity. Enjoy this episode. IT Visionaries is created by the team at mission.org and brought to you by the Salesforce Customer 360 platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Build connected experience, empower every employee, and deliver continuous innovation with the customer at the center of everything you do. Learn more at salesforce.com/platform. This podcast is created by the team at mission.org.
Welcome to another episode of IT Visionaries. I'm Ian Faison, host of IT Visionaries, and today we are joined by a special guest. Jeff, what's going on?
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, great to have you. So we're going to get into a bunch of the things that you're working on, talking IT. We're going to talk about your latest book a little bit, how the role of the CIO is changing, and your background. So let's get into it. How did you get started in technology?
That's a great question. I kind of got into it by accident. I was really not sure what I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. The only thing I ever wanted to do when I was a kid was be a rock star. I was going to, write the next great rock ballad and blaze into glory, and found out that you have to have talent for that, and I didn't. And so I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I was actually working for a bank as a bill collector. And on a lark, I bought this new thing that just got released. It was a Commodore 64. And I fell in love with that Commodore 64. I learned that I could program it and make it do all kinds of neat and amazing things. And I just got consumed by computers, computer programming. And at the time I was, my commute was about 45 minutes to an hour by bus each way. And I was just consuming textbooks on PL1 programming, IMS databases, system development lifecycle, database theory and design, everything I could get my hands on. And finally worked my way at the bank where I was working, worked my way into what at that time it was called the IS department, Information Systems Department, and became a programmer. And the rest, as they say, is history.
It's so funny how many people got their start on the Commodore.
I know.
Yeah, we hear it more often than you'd think. It's pretty amazing.
Well, I wrote this series of blogs for Intel. This was, probably 4 or 5 years ago now. It was called the Path to CIO, and the premise was no kid ever sits around dreaming of growing up to be a CIO one day, right? Yet we all end up there. So how did it happen? How did we end up as CIOs? And almost to a person, of the 12 people I interviewed for that, almost every single one of them got their start on a Commodore 64.
What a world.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, I definitely I feel like we've seen that as well. So flash forward to today. Tell me what you're up to now.
So now I am I'm out on my own. I am a strategic IT advisor as well as an author and a speaker. And so I host podcasts, I do webinars, write books, I write blogs, all about, for the most part, about technology, about leadership, specifically technology leadership, and trying to my motto, I guess, the best way to describe it is changing the face of IT, because I think the leadership skills that got us here over the last 50 or 60 years of technology are not the same skills that businesses demand today, nor are they the skills that are going to take our departments and our companies into the future.
Yeah, so let's get into that. What are you seeing? You've been a CIO, you've been a head of technology. What are some of the things that you're seeing that is required for CIOs today?
Well, I think one of the biggest changes that I've seen and will continue to see, I believe, is that you have to have much deeper business acumen. And that goes beyond the decimal points. It goes beyond the P&L and the balance sheet to understanding the business, understanding how the business makes money, and really understanding the business's customers. And then bringing technology to help solve problems and advance the goals of the organization, rather than sitting in the back room trying to automate and create more productivity through automation. Automation's important, but now it's all about the customer experience and about what's going on at that end of the business. And I think that's probably been the biggest shift. And one of the things that I think we're going to start seeing is a lot more verticalization of technology roles. It used to be, and it still is pretty much the case right now, that when you talk to an IT pro and ask them what they do, they say, well, I'm in tech, or I'm a coder, or whatever it might be. They don't say, well, I'm in manufacturing, or I'm in FinServe, or I'm in FinTech. So that they're not identifying with the vertical that their organization is in. And I think over more and more, as you get more embedded in the organization, you're going to end up becoming verticalized. People are going to want to hire technology professionals that have experience in their industry, because it's going to be so important for them to be able to differentiate against their competition, that they need that deep business acumen. So I think that's the number one thing that I think we're going to see. I think in addition to that, the old stereotypes of the IT pro that sits in the back room and doesn't really get out and talk much with his coworkers, I think we're going to see that they have to be more collaborative. They have to be more communicative within the organization and without. And I think one of the other things, and I know we're going to touch on this today, is IT needs to be more diverse. We need gender diversity. We need racial diversity, diversity of thought throughout our teams in order to meet the business demands.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think a lot of the CIOs that we see that are the best in class are the folks who are really dialed in on the business problems, but also are figuring out ways to embed technology into their products and services, right? Like
exactly.
are closer to the actual business model, or closer to the market than they were in the past. And a lot of the traditional IT functions, they figure out ways to replace them, right? Or to automate them, or to make it seamless, so that part of the KTLO, that keep the lights on part of the business is gone. It's like, yep, okay, lights are on, now what? But I think a lot of people struggle to like get that seat at the table. Like, what do you think the best folks are doing?
Well, I think they are interested in the business. And I think the men and women that get that seat at the table have embedded themselves in the business. It's, one of the things that I used to do when I was CIO was I would go spend the day with business leaders. I was working for a large nonprofit that had retail stores, and I would visit the retail stores with our vice president of retail, because what that enabled me to do is see the business through his eyes. What things were important to him? What was he looking at? What things caught his attention as he walked through a store? And that enabled me to begin to understand what role our technology played in. At the same organization, we would take time, the IT department would take time to volunteer in the stores and just help and work in the stores a couple of days a year. again, it gives you that experience, that walking a mile in their shoes, but it shows you how they interact with the technology and what things are working and maybe what things could be done better, both for the employee and for the customer that's experienced the technology.
So as you're working with CIOs and IT leaders now, like what are you hearing them concerned about? What are the things that they're worried about?
Well, I mean, we've obviously got the first half of 2020, and that is on everybody's mind right now. The shelter in place, the work from home, what's it going to mean to return to work? We've got the racial tensions in many of our communities, so we're trying to check in on our teams there. So those top of mind items right now are really centered around those. When you start to peel back the layers of that a little bit, one of the things that's top of mind, and it's always top of mind for the CIO, is security. How are we going to keep things secure? How are we going to keep things secure in a work from home environment where now all of a sudden your network, your perimeter has extended into people's homes? Where perhaps it wasn't there before, and how do you make sure that you're still running that same level of security with that same level of confidence that you did before? And so I think that's on the top of everybody's mind. I think one of the other things that I hear a lot of CIOs here in the Midwest talking about is getting that seat at the table. How do you get there? How do you make sure that the colleagues in the business are understanding technology, but also seeing where it can benefit? So we spend a lot of time having those types of conversations, and then the third piece that I'm going to be really interested to see how this plays out in the second half is retaining talent. People have worked really, really hard to build strong teams. And I think we're going to start to see a lot of movement in the IT space in the third and fourth quarter, probably closer to the fourth quarter than the third. But I think ramifications and fallout from what's happened in the first half of the year, I think we're going to see a lot of movement. So I think CIOs are concerned about keeping their teams intact and making sure that their teams are executing at a high level.
You mentioned diversity, obviously a huge problem in technology companies, but a huge problem in IT organizations in any company.
Yes.
What are some of the things that you've seen as best practices for folks to build a more diverse team?
Well, I think what it boils down to is being intentional. You have to go where the diverse candidates are. Whether that's a women in IT group that's in your local area, or perhaps it's the Black Data Processing Association. There's various groups that bring people of diverse backgrounds together. And if you're looking there for your candidate pool, you're going to start to be diverse. And I think the other part of it that plays along with the intentionality is you have to be intentional about hiring a diverse candidate. A good friend of mine, CIO for one of the airlines that's located here in town, had an opening on his as a part of his direct team, one of his direct reports, and he spent a couple of months filling that position because he was adamant he wanted a diverse candidate to join his group. And so he took the time, he was patient, and he found the right person. And I think that's the key to creating diversity, is going where the diverse candidates are.
Were there things that you would do, as a CIO that made sure that you spent a certain amount of your time or your team's time to try to figure stuff like that out?
We were always talking about those types of things within our organization. And it was part of our annual meeting, part of our strategy session that we would get together as a team and talk about where we were in terms of gender diversity, ethnic diversity, racial diversity, and talk about who knew who in what areas so that we could make those connections when we had the opening. So we were very intentional about it. I wouldn't say we were perfect, far from it. but I think we made some pretty good strides. We always tried to be open and welcoming to all kinds of thought. We had a couple of gentlemen on our team that were Muslim, and we made sure that they had an opportunity for their daily prayers and a space for their daily prayers where they could have some privacy and do that. And we also, as a team, we would celebrate the end of Ramadan with them. Ramadan is traditionally, if I remember correctly, is traditionally celebrated with a large meal. And so we would go out to eat after Ramadan as a team to help celebrate that event in their world. And that starts to make it be not only a diverse team, but an inclusive team. And I think that's the other part of diversity is you have to make sure that all the voices are being heard. And if all the voices aren't speaking up, you have to draw that out of them. You have to make sure that they're raising their voice and sharing their opinions, sharing their thoughts, and that they feel safe and comfortable doing so.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, from my experience, just don't know where to start, right? And there's like lots of organizations that if you don't know where to start or you're worried about, X, Y, and Z, there's organizations that you can go to help, like Tech Inclusion or places like that. Mm-hmm. And what matters is, like talking to your employees and starting the dialogue and starting the conversation and not being, afraid to talk about, all of those sort of things. Mm-hmm. And again, like making an effort, you have to put resources behind it. And like you said, it's not just diversity of, race or religion, but diversity of thought of, like if you're in Central Ohio and you only, recruit from 2 schools near you. Well, of course you're going to do that because those are the ones near you. But right. Also, there's, especially with, so many people working from home now and figuring out remote workforce, there's all sorts of things that will be options in the future. And not only that, you need to help your business units, the line of business owners figure out how they can leverage technology to do those sort of things as well.
Exactly. There's a great book because we tend to hire from within our networks, right? 87% of jobs, I think, are filled through your professional network. And so we tend to hire from within our network. And if you look at your network and, I'm an old white guy from Indiana. If I look at my network and it's a bunch of old white guys from Indiana, that's who I'm going to be talking to and that's who I'm going to be drawing from. So there's a great book called Network Beyond Bias, and it's how to build your network intentionally to bring in diverse people into your network and talk to them, work with them, have them be a part of your professional insights, your professional studies, and it really takes networking to a whole new level.
You are a contributing member of the Forbes Technology Council, and you've written a few really good articles on there, one of them being 4 conversations to have in your first 30 days as CIO. I'm curious, what are the things that CIOs should do in their first 30 days? Or if you're interviewing to be a CIO, what can you put forward as your plan of what you're going to be doing in the first, 30, 60, 90 days?
Well, it was funny that article was originally titled 3 conversations that you should have in your first 30 days. And I added in, well, you need to have a conversation with yourself. So it became 4 conversations. And so in that particular post, I talk about having a conversation with yourself, with your teammates, with your peers in the company, and with your key vendors so that you begin to understand. But I think as you're entering in your first 30 days or 90 days, you have to come in with a plan. It's almost table stakes to have a 90-day plan or a 100-day plan when you come in at an executive level of here are the things that I think I'm going to be doing in the first 90 days. And I emphasize think because you have to remain open to the fact that you are going to learn a tremendous amount in the first 30 days, in the first 60 days, that's going to require you to adjust your plan. Rarely, I think, would you come in and everything is exactly what you thought it was going to be, and you're just going to move forward. But I think you have to have an idea of where you're going to start. And I start with those 4 conversations of when you're talking to yourself, so to speak, you're understanding your strengths and weaknesses so that you know as you talk to your team where they fit. Are they a complement to your strengths and weaknesses, or are they a match to your strengths and weaknesses? And does that leave gaps in your organization that you may need to fill? As you're talking with your peers in the company, you're trying to find out from them their perception of IT and what they need from IT. And that can be humbling sometimes, because sometimes they don't have a great perception of IT, and it shows you that you've got an uphill battle to go after. And then as you're talking with your key partners, you're going to need help, chances are, to make real transformative moves within any organization. You're going to need help from your key partners. So understanding who they are in that organization and what talents they bring, that gives you a really good view of the landscape, I think, of what it is that you've got. You have to know where you are before you can know where you're wanting to go. And so if you spend that time having those conversations up front, you get this really nice picture of, in IT, we call it the as is, right? We're always talking about the as is model versus the to be model. So you get this nice picture of the as is so that you can then begin to have a vision for what the to be is going to be.
You wrote a book called Amplify Your Value, Leading IT with Strategic Vision. The CIO obviously becoming more and more of a strategic leader for some companies, like, leading the entire technology org. For others, maybe the CTO does that. We here on the show are agnostic to what your title is,
right,
but that head of technology, whether it's internal tech or external tech, but a lot of people are owning that employee experience, or owning that piece of it. I'm curious, like, why did you write the book, and what are some of the things that maybe have changed since you wrote it?
Well, I wrote the book because I was having a conversation with a group of CIOs here in the area, and I asked them the question of why aren't you more strategic? Why aren't you being more strategic? And I thought I knew the answer. I thought the answer was going to be, my organization doesn't want me to be, or my organization doesn't let me be strategic. And instead, the answer was, we don't know how. And so what I did in the book was I took lessons that I had learned over 2 stints of being a CIO, along with interviews of countless other CIOs, and started to put together, what does it mean to lead IT with strategic vision? And it starts with the vision of the company. And I was lucky enough in the organizations in which I was CIO, our company had a pretty strong vision. And so I was able to then work with my team to develop a technology vision that supported that. There are other CIOs, and I even talk about a couple of them in the book, that when they get to their organization, they're new in the role, the company doesn't have a strategic vision. They don't really know what they do or can't articulate it. And so there's also some steps in there that you can take to help formulate a vision for the organization, because it starts with the company vision and then the technology vision of how can technology further the mission and the vision of the organization. And as you begin to understand that and the constructs that you're operating within, then you begin to put together various strategies that help you get there. One example that I talk about in the book, and this was probably 6 or 7 years ago now, was cloud. I mean, at that point, not everybody was going cloud. There was still a lot of focus on traditional on-premises data centers. And we opted to use cloud as a strategy, not as a technology play, but our strategy was we wanted to free up our business colleagues not to be tethered to a desk. So our motto became any device, anytime, any place. And one of the ways that we were able to achieve that was through the advent of cloud and SaaS tools, mobility, and those types of technologies became enablers to see the strategy, and I think that's part of what I lay out in the book. I think what's changed since the book came out, it came out in 2018. So it's a couple years old, and we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, and that is this incredible pace of change that's going on in technology. And so technology has changed, and while the strategies that I talk about in the book, the approach to the strategies hasn't changed, the underlying technologies have changed dramatically. Now we're talking about things like Internet of Things and 5G and artificial intelligence that are now becoming real. And so I still think the book is viable. I think it teaches you how to look at those technologies and understand which ones of those will help your organization, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to do. And you may look at it and say, this IoT space is really interesting, but that really doesn't apply to us. So we're going to kind of leave that one sit for a little bit. But oh my gosh, this artificial intelligence and RPA, that can do wonders for our business. So let's start really exploring those and bringing those in. So that I think that's the change, but also the as things change, they remain the same, right? The strategies and how you approach it, I think, are still the same. It's just the underlying technologies and approaches to technologies that perhaps has changed in the last year and a half to 2 years.
So I want to put you on the spot here a little bit and say, you're not a sitting CIO right this second, but if you were, if tomorrow, we anointed you CIO and you took over an org, I'm curious, how would you go into a role right now? How would you think about structuring your team and structuring, those relationships that you talked about, the in-house line of business, or your internal team, line of business, executive team, and then your vendor relationships?
Well, I think the first step, and where I always default to, is research. And I don't mean that in the you're popping open a textbook and you're reading, but you're understanding the industry. If you're anointing me CIO of an industry, perhaps I don't have direct industry experience in that industry. So I'm going to research and I'm going to understand what I'm going to go to LinkedIn. I'm going to go to Twitter. I'm going to go to various social media platforms and find CIOs in that industry and understand, what are they talking about? What problems are they having? What things are on their mind? So even though I'm not a sitting CIO, I spend a good deal of my day talking with CIOs, and you find that the problems that you're dealing with sometimes are different based on the industry, but sometimes they're the same. But you start to formulate an idea of, okay, if I'm walking into Roadrunner Technologies, I'm gonna assume that because they're in the traffic light industry, that they've got this set of problems because their competitor at Acme has those kind of problems. And I've talked to their CIO and I know what types of things she's working on. And so I think that's where I'm going to start my conversations is, hey, I don't know if you're facing this particular problem, but I'd like to understand your views on that problem. And if you are facing it, then let's talk about different ways that I might be able to help our technology department help you solve that problem. So that's part of it. And then the other part of it, and I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about the Forbes article, is getting to know your team. And that work can start before you walk in the door. LinkedIn is a wonderful platform for understanding who the employees are of a given organization. Start identifying those people that are on that IT team. Who do you know that knows them? Are you connected with them yourself? Can you reach out and talk to them about their views even before you walk in the door so that you're armed with some of that knowledge? So you're spending your first couple of days trying to figure out where the water fountain and the restrooms are. You've already got some foundation of, here's the situation and here's some of the challenges that I'm going to be facing walking in the door.
Yeah. And do you think with the vendor relationships, like how would you look at building the technology, whatever you want to call it, expansion team, or the folks that are constantly looking for new technologies, that are evaluating new things? How would you look at like the innovation cell, for lack of a better word, and those type of projects, making those build or buy decisions, things like that?
Well, I think that's one of the challenges that a CIO faces all the time. Is you mentioned it earlier about the keeping the lights on. If you're overwhelmed with the keeping the lights on work, it doesn't leave a lot of time for innovation. So, assuming that you're walking into an organization that has some capacity, then I think it's starting to form relationships with the key vendors that you've identified in that space. I mentioned earlier Internet of Things. So if I'm walking into an industry, I'm in central Indiana, so perhaps it's agriculture, because believe it or not, IoT is huge in agriculture. You're starting to see a lot of connected devices, even at the family farm. So I'm going to start researching who are the key vendors in that space, whether they're specialized in agriculture, in ag tech, or whether just call it general IoT. Identify who they are and start to work with them and start to build relationships with them so that you can be innovative. One of the things that I did in the stops that I made as CIO, and I encourage CIOs everywhere to do this, and that is treat your vendors as partners. I was always guilty of saying I want more partners and fewer vendors, and I had to finally ask myself, what do I mean when I say partner? Because it goes well beyond just the transaction, right? There has to be trust, there has to be respect, and you have to build that over time. And that's not going to happen if you don't let your vendors in. So one of the things that I started doing, I mentioned earlier that I would have an annual offsite with my team, and we would do planning for the next year. I started inviting my vendors. The first year that we did it, we invited, I couldn't really identify who were quote unquote strategic vendors. So we just drew a line at a certain dollar amount of spend and said any vendor that we're spending more than X with gets 2 seats at the table at our strategic planning offsite. So they got to see behind the curtain. They were seeing our budgets. They were seeing our plans. They were understanding the business challenges. They got to know my team. And over the course of several years, we were then able to identify who were the vendors that really thought about things strategically. And so we started to stratify those invitations. And even though we may not be spending a huge amount with a given company, they would get a seat at the table because we knew that they were thinking about issues strategically, and they were thinking about us as their customer and what our strategies were. And so we started to form this great dialogue over, it was usually a day and a half, of here are the business challenges that our organization is facing. You already know our technology challenges. How do we start attacking those? How do we start solving those? And what things can you help us learn and do? And it created this amazing ecosystem of vendors that cared deeply about our organization. And honestly, we cared about their success as well. And I think that's what starts to build those types of partnerships and those types of ecosystems that can help drive innovation, because you get the creative juices flowing when you're having those kinds of conversations.
You're working on another book that's not specifically around IT, but I think has some good lessons for up and coming IT professionals. Can you share a little bit about the book, and then we'll go into some of the lessons here?
Absolutely. So the next book, it comes out August 24th, knock on wood if everything holds to schedule, is called Amplify Your Job Search: Strategies for Finding Your Dream Job. And while it's not specific to an IT professional. It's more focused on any professional, white collar professional that is looking for something better. They're either in transition because perhaps they were part of a reduction in force due to COVID-19 or other circumstances, or they're just struggling where they are. They want a change. And what this book does is it provides a framework of how to build a plan to identify who you are and what you want in a career and a job, and then helps you with some strategies for identifying roles that might fit those needs and companies who have those roles. And then it uses a very data-driven, laser-focused approach to networking, professional networking into those organizations so that you can find and land that next job, that dream job that you're looking for.
So with regards to IT and technology, obviously things are changing so fast. What you went to school for, what you went to a boot camp for, anything like that could be changing so much, over the next few years. Gigantic ecosystems, like obviously, Salesforce, who's the awesome sponsor of the show, but, becoming like an admin and all these things are careers that like we didn't even know could have existed. So many developer communities and places for talent to learn more. Like, what would be your advice for the skills that you need to build if you're an up and coming technology leader?
I'm going to answer that in a couple of ways, and you mentioned one of the answers of how do you keep up, to the question of how do you keep up. You join those networking groups because I think you're going to see that as a part of those groups, you're gonna learn and absorb and continue to grow in your career. But I think, and we touched on this earlier, I would encourage the IT professionals out there who are looking to grow in their career to focus on some of the skills. We used to call them soft skills, but I think they're essential skills now. And those are things that we mentioned earlier: collaboration, communication, it's design thinking, it's systems thinking, critical thinking, all of those types of skills that when you know those things and you're good at those things, the languages can change or the technology can change and your skills are transferable. You know how to look at a problem and solve a problem. Then it just becomes a matter of learning the syntax of the new language. And I know that sounds a little trite, but it's true. It was true back in my day. I started life as a PL1 programmer and then got a job as a COBOL programmer. Business problems I was trying to solve were similar, and the approach and the logic and the thinking and the design work that I did was pretty much exactly the same. I just needed to learn the new syntax of COBOL. The same holds true today. So that's where I would say the IT pro needs to focus, is on some of those skills that then become transferable to other technologies.
Do you think that there are, any technologies or things that you think people should especially be focusing on right now? Our RPA obviously is hot. What other technologies are you excited about? Should people be focusing on?
I think one of the things that has the potential to revolutionize a lot of the way we live and work is the combination of 5G and Internet of Things. I think that space is going to change the way our cities operate. It's going to change the way we work. It's got the potential to be revolutionary. And so I have been watching that space for a year or two and talking with people about what they see coming with that. And then the other one you touched on a little bit with RPA, I think true business use cases for artificial intelligence those algorithms, machine learning, I think has the ability to, again, change the way we work. I think we're at this interesting time that work itself is changing. You touched on it earlier, Ian, when you were talking about the keeping the lights on and the automation that has gone into that to all but eliminate the need for it. Well, that's probably on the back end is artificial intelligence, machine learning that's doing that and working with that. So I think that's where I would focus attention in the short term being 2 to 3 years. And where is that going to fit in whatever industry you happen to be in? The other thing that I'll add is, even though I was talking earlier about verticalization of industries, I think it's important for CIOs and senior IT leaders to talk with people from other industries, because things that solve a problem in one industry might just solve a problem in your industry if applied differently. We had this interesting conversation. I run this networking group here in Indianapolis called the Indy CIO Network. It's a group of about 300 CIOs and senior IT leaders. And we had a conversation back in January. We were talking about taking advantage of the fact that it was 2020. The question that was posed was, okay, it's 2030. What does your industry look like now? And so we had several of the members that were talking about their specific industries. And what was interesting was the impacts that one industry had on another. A great example was one of our members is in real estate development, in industrial space. So think warehousing and logistics. And what they were talking about was the autonomous vehicles that would enable these warehouses to be built farther and further out from cities, because they'd all be automated with robotics and AI and autonomous vehicles. They wouldn't need an employee base for them to operate efficiently. And so he even said, well, we'll just build it in the middle of a cornfield. Well, on the other side of the table is the CIO for one of the leading seed companies in the area. And so I turned to him and asked him, well, what do you think about them building these warehouses in the middle of your fields? And, it created this interesting exchange between two very different industries that could end up having impacts on each other because of advents of technology. And so I think it's important for IT leaders to have those cross-pollinating discussions with other IT leaders.
Okay, let's get into our lightning round. These questions are fast and easy. Just like the Salesforce Customer 360 platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience, you can go to salesforce.com/platform to learn more. Salesforce is the best. They've been with us since the beginning of this podcast, the first episode, and we love them. Check them out, salesforce.com/platform. Lightning round questions. Jeff,
Yes,
are you ready?
I am ready.
Number 1, what app on your phone is the most fun?
The app on my phone that is most fun, I tell you, the one that I spend the most time in is LinkedIn. I don't know that you count that as fun, but if you look at it, the one that I spend the most time in is that one. The other one, and this probably gets closer to fun, is my Sonos system. So my music. I'm a big music guy, and I love cranking up the Rolling Stones.
What habit or hobby have you picked up during shelter in place?
The habit that I have picked up is going for a walk at lunch. And I don't do it every day, but I never did it when was going to an office every day. It was always, you had a lunch meeting to go to. And so I go out and walk, and it clears my head for the afternoon, helps me to focus. And it's solely because of shelter in place.
Do you have a hidden talent or passion?
Oh, it's not so hidden, but I love Lewis and Clark. In addition to being an IT geek, I'm a history geek. And that's probably my passion. I wouldn't say it's hidden because everybody knows it by now.
Do you have a book or podcast or TV show that you've been binging recently?
We started watching Longmire. I'm a big Western fan as far as the genre goes, and I know it's been out. I think they're on season 6, but we just discovered it a couple weeks ago, so we've been watching that.
If you weren't in IT, what would you be doing?
Oh, if I had talent, I'd be a rock star. I love music. I love that creative outlet. I'd be doing that.
Well, awesome. That's it. That's all we got for today.
Awesome.
Jeff, any final thoughts? Anything to plug?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity, Ian. Really enjoyed the conversation, and hope that the listeners out there got a few tidbits, a few nuggets that might help them. Very happy to connect with anybody via LinkedIn or email, and look forward to connecting with the audience in that way.
Awesome. Thanks again, and really appreciate it. Take care.
My pleasure. Thank you, Ian.
IT Visionaries is created by the team at mission.org and brought to you by the Salesforce Customer 360 platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Build connected experience, empower every employee, and deliver continuous innovation with the customer at the center of everything you do. Learn more at salesforce.com/platform.